Hola, ¿qué tal? Buenas tardes a todas, a todos. Gracias por estar aquí. Estamos muy contentas en el Centro para la Justicia Global. Nos sentimos muy honradas de tener la presencia de la embajadora de Palestina en México. Ella nos dictará esta conferencia sobre el genocidio en Palestina. Antes de pasarle el micrófono a la embajadora, quiero comentar que nuestra conferencia será en inglés. Ella hablará en inglés. Tenemos gente que nos acompaña de otros países. Entonces ella hará su conferencia en inglés y yo apoyaré en la parte de la traducción. Me parece que el día de hoy el 50% es gente que habla español y el otro 50 habla inglés. Entonces estará dividida la conversación. Antes de iniciar con el tema, les vamos a platicar un poco sobre la experiencia de la embajadora, una experiencia muy amplia, y agradecer a las colectivas que nos acompañan el día de hoy. So before we start today, thank you very much for coming. We're going to do it both in English and Spanish. The ambassador will be speaking in English and I will be translating. I want to say thank you to everyone. We have different collectives from different parts of Mexico. So I want to thank them before we start with the conference. Quiero agradecer en primer lugar a la embajadora, Nadya Rasheed, y las colectivas que nos acompañan el día de hoy. Es las compas de BDS México, el Comité Leonés de Solidaridad con Palestina, Zarape Palestino de Saltillo, Yo Te Veo SMA, Compañeras para Palestina, que también son de aquí de San Miguel, WMPP, que también es de aquí de San Miguel, Tuneros por Palestina, que son de San Luis Potosí, Red Frontera Palestina, que son de Ciudad Juárez, y el programa de radio en San Miguel de Allende, Sigamos hablando de Palestina. Son las colectivas que nos acompañan el día de hoy. Estamos muy contentas de tenerles a todas que representan regiones de nuestro vasto México. Thank you to all the collectives that are here with us today. They represent the work we are doing in different cities of Mexico, of this big country. So thank you for joining us. The ambassador is gonna tell us about the genocide in Palestine. So the ambassador, Nadia Rashid, she's being the ambassador of the Palestinian embassy in Mexico. She came here on October 2024 to represent Palestine. And from November 2020 to October 24, she was the ambassador of the Palestinian embassy in Uruguay. From 2000 to 2020, she was the permanent observer of the Mission of Palestine to the United Nations. And she had a lot of experience working in the United Nations. The ambassador studied international relations in the University of California, Davis, from 1996 to 2000. And then she had a master's in international affairs from the University of Columbia in New York. Entonces les quiero compartir un poco sobre la carrera de la embajadora. Ella llegó a México en octubre de 2024 para representar a Palestina ante el gobierno de México y de noviembre de 2020 a octubre de 2024 fue la embajadora de Palestina en Uruguay. Del año 2000 a 2020, ella fue la observadora permanente de la misión de Palestina en las Naciones Unidas. Tuvo una amplia experiencia en Naciones Unidas representando a su país. Y la embajadora estudió Relaciones Internacionales en la Universidad de California, Davis, y estudió una maestría en la Universidad de Columbia en Nueva York. Le pasamos el micrófono a la embajadora. Ella nos va a platicar, nos va a dar su conferencia sobre el genocidio que se lleva a cabo en Palestina. Y después de que ella nos exponga sus puntos, esperemos tener un poquito de tiempo de preguntas y respuestas, porque el
Sí.
tiempo de traducción pues nos lleva un poco más, ¿no? Entonces, ojalá, pero déjenos en el chat sus preguntas. Si no hay tiempo de responder todo, con gusto le enviaremos a la embajadora esas preguntas, porque son muchas colectivas representando muchas zonas de México. Entonces, con mucho gusto le enviaremos a ella esas preguntas para que en un futuro haya oportunidad de que ella les conteste. Entonces, pasamos el micrófono a la embajadora. Muchas gracias.
Bueno, muchas gracias, Lulu, y gracias a todos y todos por estar aquí. Realmente es un honor para mí estar con ustedes. Y lo siento mucho, Lula, porque van a darte mucho trabajo para hacer la traducción, pero vamos a ver cómo podemos hacerlo. Entonces, ¿cuál es la mejor manera para hacerlo? ¿Para leer un párrafo o qué? ¿O para hacer la traducción o vamos a hacerlo total, to- todo en inglés? ¿Qué
Sí,
estás?
yo pensaría si usted, embajadora, nos puede desarrollar el tema en inglés y entonces hacer ciertas pausas para en esa parte yo traducir al español.
Bien, y después también yo puedo enviarlo en español
Muy
sin
bien.
problema. Ok,
Sí,
bueno,
muchas
bueno.
gracias.
Ok, gracias, gracias. Okay, it's a treat for me to do something in English in Mexico. So I took the offer. I didn't realize it was a 50-50 audience. But let me start by wishing you all a very good afternoon. It is really very nice for me to meet all of you, and hopefully we can meet in person one day. First, let me begin by, on behalf of my people, the Palestinian people, I bring you greetings from a land that known has known both immense sorrow and unbreakable resilience. I stand before you deeply grateful for your presence and the courage it takes to walk beside a people who refuse to surrender their freedom, their sovereignty, and their dignity. I also would like to begin by expressing my profound gratitude to the entire community of San Miguel de Allende, and in particular to you, Lulu Guerrera, for organizing this conference over Zoom. And I would also like to thank all the colectivos that have stood beside Palestine all over Mexico and who have made this gathering possible. It is something very important to say that this solidarity is not symbolic, it is a moral clarity in action. Friends, when we speak of Palestine, we are not speaking of a distant geopolitical issue. We are confronting one of the most defining moral failures of our time. What is unfolding is not merely an occupation that has lasted now for almost 80 years. We are talking about a population for more than 2 years that has endured a genocide that defines any sort of understanding, any sort of way to explain exactly what is happening. And it is also to look toward the West Bank, where military occupation and apartheid continue to suffocate the daily life of Palestinians living there. The machinery of destruction adapts to geography. In Gaza, it appears as annihilation through bombardment and siege. In the West Bank, it manifests as fragmentation through land confiscation, military raids on a nearly daily basis, settler violence, displacement, and illegal architecture designed to normalize what is not normal and to legalize what is completely illegal. Lulu, ¿quieres traducir? No? Okay. So first we'll begin with Gaza. Since the
Perdón,
so-called ceasefire,
perdón, embajadora,
perdón.
perdón, creo que mi micrófono estaba cerrado. Bueno, sí me gustaría traducir esta primera parte. La embajadora
Sí,
les agradece
adelante.
por estar a todas aquí, les agradece a todas las colectivas del territorio mexicano que se encuentran aquí y que tengamos en cuenta que este genocidio que se ha recrudecido en los últimos años tiene una historia de 80, más de 80 años de ocupación, una ocupación ilegal de Palestina por parte de Israel. Entonces un tema geopolítico muy que tiene una larga data, ¿no? Tiene muchos años este, esta ocupación ilegal y que en la actualidad Israel lo que busca es normalizar lo que no es normal, ¿no? Esta violencia hacia la población de Palestina, esta violencia extrema y esta búsqueda de exterminio de la población.
So let us begin with Gaza. As you all know, there was a ceasefire that was announced more than 134 days ago. And since that ceasefire, Israel has killed more than 600 Palestinians, including more than 100 children. So if we're talking about the death toll from the genocide, including with this so-called ceasefire, we are now talking about a death toll that exceeds 72,072 people. Among them are more than 21,000 children. I think it's always so hard for me every time to have to read that. And again, it's important to also state that these are the numbers that we know of. We know that the number will increase by many since we don't still have the luxury of being able to find our our loved ones who are under the rubble still. And this is a number actually that Israel itself agrees to. So you could imagine that this number will rise as the time goes, if we even get the chance to actually retrieve our loved ones from under the rubble. And when we talk about 21,000 children, I mean, if we just focus on the children, we have to also remember that these are not statistics, not a headline, they are children. And many of us are parents. So I think we can try to understand what that means. I mean, these who are were children who had favorite colors, who argued with their siblings, who used to draw things and put them on their refrigerator doors. You know, they used to write in their diaries of dreams that they will never be able to realize. These are futures, 21,000 futures completely taken away. They are not collateral damage. This has been and continues to be a targeted destruction of an entire generation. More than that, we also have 80% of Gaza's population who have been displaced, most of them more than two, three times. We also have more than 171,000 people who have been injured. When we talk about injuries, we're talking about bodies that have been torn apart by shrapnel, limbs amputated, horrible burns to the body, and trauma that will never, ever fully heal. Sadly, now with this ceasefire, there may not be numbers of 400, 500 being killed, but there are still many dying. And they are dying not from bombs, even though there are still bombs, but they're dying from the deliberate deprivation of medicine, from destroyed hospitals, not having the correct equipment since everything was destroyed, from the systematic dismantling of healthcare. I mean, this what happened in Gaza, the world has not seen more doctors or nurses, paramedics, humanitarian workers, journalists, children killed. It was almost as Israel was trying to break every cruel record that has ever existed. No one was spared. And this was a policy. It was a policy by design. Something that is equally mind-blowing is that today Gaza is the place with the largest population of amputated children in the world. And we also have thousands of orphans. More than 60,000 children have lost one or both parents. More than 2,200 families have been completely erased from the civil registry. So you're talking about last names and generations completely wiped out in minutes. So the destruction that has occurred in Gaza goes way beyond bodies and buildings. It targets memory, it targets continuity, it targets the future as it targeted the past and the present. Schools, universities, cultural centers, libraries have been completely destroyed. Property of the UN, many that were being used as shelters, have been bombed. Poets, professors, scientists, community leaders all have been killed. It was a policy deliberately meant to decapitate an entire society, an entire civilization. Lulu?
De lo que habla la embajadora es de que el supuesto cese al fuego no es tal. Hay más de 72.000 personas que han perdido la vida en este genocidio. Hay 21.000 niñas y niños que han perdido la vida. Entonces no podemos hablar de un daño colateral. No es un daño colateral. Se ha perdido una generación entera. Hay muchísimas personas amputadas, quemadas. Hay muchísimas personas con traumas, sobre todo en la parte psicológica, muy, muy graves. Eh, los hospitales fueron destruidos, no hay medicamento para la gente enferma, eh, muchísima gente que se dedicaba al área médica, al área de la salud, fue asesinada, muchos periodistas, muchas periodistas, maestras, maestros, y pues al parecer es el objetivo de Israel romper todos los récords mundiales de atrocidades en este momento, ¿no? Este, en Gaza hay muchísimas víctimas. El mayor número de infancias amputadas en el mundo está ahí, en Gaza.
Gracias, Lulu. And yet, even in this darkness, Palestinians refuse to give up. They refuse extinction. Some examples are for Palestinians when movement is restricted, they connect in other ways. When electricity is cut, candles are lit. When institutions are destroyed, communities reorganize. We've seen over these past 2 years of the genocide, young students who are studying to be doctors volunteer in hospitals where many doctors were killed deliberately. We've seen journalists document destruction even as their own home collapses or even as their own family members were killed. We've seen families create classrooms in tents and community leaders organize food distribution under complete bombardment. Many people always talk about the resilience of the Palestinian people. I mean, it is something that we wish we didn't have to be resilient. It is, however, not accidental. It is something that we have inherited. For Palestinians, existence itself is resistance to remain on our land, to remember what our ancestors have told us about Palestine and the way that life used to be before the existence of Israel, and how all three major religions, Jews, Christians, and Muslims, used to live in peace before Zionism appeared. To be Palestinian, it means to rebuild. It means, again, how we teach our children the story, the names of our towns and our history. This is how we protect our dignity, and this is how we plant hope in what remains of our land and what now remains in Gaza, which is scorched earth. And it's important that something is stated, and sadly, it has to be stated time and time again. That is, what is happening and what happened in Gaza is not a war. When we talk about war, it's talking about two equal parties, two armies facing one another. We are a people that live under occupation without any protection, even though the law is designed to protect exactly us, people who are under occupation. And Israel is the occupier who has actual obligations under international humanitarian law to protect the civilian population that they occupy. What this is a genocide. It is extermination. It is collective punishment. It is the industrial scale destruction of civilian life carried out with the most advanced weaponry and the political cover of the superpower of the world. And something that I think is really important to talk about is that Israel has actually turned this genocide into something of a business, a profitable business. It has been used as a laboratory I mean, we heard over a year ago of people talking about weapons that were being used on the ground that literally vaporized people. And it sounded so crazy that almost I didn't even want to, and I probably didn't at that time, repeat it because it sounded something out of a sci-fi movie. But in actuality, this is something that has been now corroborated by many, and now that is being talked about, that they have used weapons on the Palestinians, besides chemical weapons that are prohibited, besides everything they've done that is completely illegal and defies every sort of law that we, in this global order that we held sacred, but using weapons that none of us have seen before, that people are literally vaporized where you cannot even find any of their DNA. This is something that really should scare us all as humanity. So that's Gaza. But we also have to talk about the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, where the violence there, sure, we could say it operates differently, but it is relentless and it is still brutal. Land confiscations, home demolitions, the amount of Palestinians that Israel has taken hostage in their prisons and detention centers that have been tortured in a way also that has been documented by countless human rights organizations, economic strangulation. For example, Israel, under the peace accords that we had with Israel, they're called the Paris Protocol that happened after the Oslo. Israel is responsible for collecting all of our tax revenues. And for the past couple of years, they have not released it to us. And we're talking about more than $3 billion, putting us also in a situation that we have to make sure that our institutions do not collapse. We're under, of course, extreme financial strain, putting strain on every single Palestinian. But for them, that is the point, is to make everything completely impossible. There are more than 700 checkpoints just in the West Bank alone that fragment daily existence into, at best, humiliation. At worst, it could be death, it could be injury, it could be taken to prison. And it's important to also note that in the West Bank alone, since October 2023, more than 1,100 Palestinians have been killed in the West Bank. And we're talking nearly a quarter of them children. And we're also talking about the same sort of idea of ethnic cleansing. There's been more than 50,000 Palestinians who have been displaced in the northern West Bank alone. And you also have the situation of armed settlers who literally on a daily basis are attacking villages, who are trying to run Palestinians off of their land. They are able to burn villages within 4 minutes, and they have the complete protection of the occupying army and, of course, complete impunity. Lulu?
La, las comunidades, a pesar del genocidio, las comunidades se reorganizan, se vuelven a reorganizar en Palestina. Y aunque a nivel mundial siempre se menciona la resiliencia que tiene Palestina, pues eso no es algo que debería de continuar, ¿no? O sea, hablar de resiliencia no tendría que ser un tema, porque lo que tendría que haber es respeto por las vidas, por respeto por la gente en Palestina. En el pasado, las tres principales religiones vivían en paz en Palestina. La gente judía, la gente cristiana, la gente musulmana vivían en paz y compartían esa tierra llamada Palestina. Pero a la llegada de los sionistas, todo se acabó y es lo que se está viviendo en este momento, en este genocidio. Eh, la embajadora habla de que la gente palestina siempre protege su dignidad, protege la esperanza, protege ese deseo de vivir con los mismos derechos que tienen las poblaciones en el resto del mundo, en el resto de los países. Y nos dice que esta no es una guerra porque no son dos países con las mismas, con el mismo armamento, con el mismo poder enfrentándose en condiciones de igualdad, ¿no? Que no, esto no es una guerra, es una ocupación ilegal sin protección para la población, es un genocidio, es una exterminación y un castigo colectivo que Israel está imponiendo sobre Palestina. Habla la embajadora de muchas armas que nadie de nosotros, de nosotras se imaginaría que existen muchas armas que Israel está experimentando con la población y es una cosa atroz, ¿no? Porque se habla de personas que son evaporadas. Cuando esas armas se utilizan, la persona es evaporada, no queda nada de esa persona. Entonces esto parece una película de ciencia ficción de terror, ¿no? Por el daño, las atrocidades que comete todos los días Israel sobre la población con el uso de armas que son totalmente ilegales bajo cualquier legislación eh, en el mundo, pero pues estamos viendo que tanto Israel como el apoyo de Estados Unidos han roto todas las leyes y han acabado con lo poco que más o menos existía en Naciones Unidas que nos ayudaba a defender nuestros derechos humanos, lo han destrozado totalmente para obtener este objetivo que es apoderarse en su totalidad de Palestina. Y la embajadora nos dice que no nos olvidemos de Cisjordania, porque ahí también se cometen muchísimas atrocidades, destruyen las casas de la gente, se llevan a la gente a la cárcel ilegalmente, desaparecen a mucha gente que supuestamente la llevaron detenida y después ya no se sabe de esa gente. Las cárceles, el tener en las cárceles a niños es una de las atrocidades más grandes. Y otra cosa es la parte económica, ¿no? Que la actividad económica que se llevaba a cabo en Cisjordania, Israel no le entrega ese dinero de lo que la gente trabaja. La embajadora habla de que son 3 billones de dólares, que ese dinero le pertenece a la gente de Palestina y simplemente Israel no les entrega su dinero y entonces los asfixia totalmente, ¿no? También desde la parte económica. También habla de las muertes en Cisjordania, de donde un cuarto de esas víctimas también son infancias, ¿no? Y el poder que tienen los colonos que llegan de Israel a invadir y a adueñarse de las tierras en Cisjordania, pues tienen todo el apoyo de Israel, ¿no? Entonces actúan con total impunidad todo lo que quieren robarse de tierras, de casas, lo hacen con total impunidad.
Bueno, gracias. So, as I was saying before, the Palestinian people live under an illegal military occupation and also an apartheid, and now a genocide. And the illegal military occupation was affirmed by the International Court of Justice around a year ago when this was brought to the International Court of Justice because Israel liked to call it a disputed territory. Therefore, it was clear to all under the rule of law that what Israel was doing was illegal, and it recommended to the General Assembly for the withdrawal of Israel from the occupied territories. But of course, all we are seeing now is the further entrenchment of of the occupation and the further colonization of our land and the stealing of our land and our natural resources. And again, Israel could never do what they do and have done in Palestine if it was not a number one, a nuclear power, but also backed by the most powerful government in the world, whether that means financially, politically, by covering for Israel in the United Nations Security Council with the veto, and also diplomatically. And this is precisely why the international responsibility cannot remain rhetorical. And this is why it is so important for solidarity and solidarity of the people of the world, which we have seen and we are so grateful for. But this solidarity also must become action. It must mean divestment from corporations profiting from occupation and genocide. BDS is a very powerful, peaceful way to oppose Israel's occupation because, again, there has to be a consequence. If there's no consequence for its crimes and its war crimes on a legal basis because of the covering of the support that it gets from the United States of America and some other powerful states, then we as a people have to do our part. It must mean refusing having apartheid-free spaces in our institutions, our universities, and other public spaces. And it must mean that we all consistently repeat that international law must be defended, but it must be defended not selectively, but universally. Because if international law cannot protect the Palestinian people, then who can it protect? And we are not talking about the complete collapse of international law, because we know that is what there is seems to be no rule-based order anymore. But what we actually need to ask ourselves is, if this happened to the Palestinian people, as we watched from our cell phones for 2 years, the most horrible atrocities that can happen to a civilian population, including these children, then why couldn't it happen anywhere else? Who was next? And that is something that is not meant to make people feel fearful, but it must make us feel that we have a responsibility to speak up, to prevent what has what has happened in Palestine from happening other places. It means that we have to insist on accountability and justice, because if there's no accountability, this will repeat itself. So we are living in a time that I think that will be written, of course, in the history books. We are living in a time where the so-called rules-based order has been completely exposed, where all of these conventions that we have signed on genocide and the protection of civilians and these rights that we've hold sacred of the right to self-determination have all been tested in Palestine. And this is why we say that Palestine is not only does not only affect Palestine or Palestinians, it is a mirror held up to humanity, because if impunity is normalized, then it does not remain just in one place. It spreads. And I think today we are sort of seeing how in other parts of the world, the same sort of actions and law is not being at all applied, and diplomacy has ceased to exist. And this affects all of us. So let me just close with again saying thank you to all of you, to all the people of San Miguel de Allende from Palestine, and to every organization who refuses to be indifferent to what is happening. And again, I think as an ambassador, as a Palestinian, as a human being, the one thing I can ask is to not look away, to not grow numb. I think what is happening with all this information that we are getting, and seems that the world itself is in a very bad state, is that it becomes hard for us to process all of this. It becomes hard for us to process where we just want to not look. And I think, yes, it's important to take breaks for our own mental health. It's important to remember also the beautiful things in life, because there are so many things, but we have to not allow ourselves to become desensitized. We cannot allow ourselves to think that genocide and the mass death of people and the horrible treatment of civilians and starvation, using starvation as a weapon, should be normalized. You know, I think as Palestine realize that we are not only fighting for our own freedom, but we are really also fighting and putting the fight before the world for the moral conscience of everybody. So I ask you please to continue your advocacy, to use your voice, to refuse to normalize injustice, to insist on dignity, and insist that we all be human beings with conscience and who care about others. And I think that Mexico and Palestine, in this case, we do stand on the same side of history. We stand on the side of memory. We stand on the same side of justice, and are on the same side when we talk about freedom, a freedom that refuses generation after generation to surrender. Thank you.
Bueno, la embajadora nos habla de que en Palestina lo que ocurre en este momento es un sistema de apartheid, un sistema de ocupación militar ilegal y un genocidio. La Corte Internacional de Justicia ya dijo que esa ocupación ilegal, por ejemplo, en Cisjordania, en el ejemplo de esa tierra, que todo eso es ilegal, pero pues Israel continúa haciéndolo. Y que recordemos que Israel es un poder nuclear apoyado por los Estados Unidos. Por eso también sucede lo que está sucediendo con Palestina. La embajadora nos pide que sigamos convirtiendo nuestra solidaridad en acción. Tenemos los ejemplos, por ejemplo, está el movimiento, el BDS. Nosotras también, algunas de nuestras colectivas, estamos en otro que se llama Firmas por Palestina MX, en donde estamos pidiendo esas firmas para que nuestro gobierno rompa relaciones con Israel, que creemos que también es algo importante empujar desde la parte política para pasar solo de la solidaridad a la acción. Dice la embajadora que debe de haber consecuencias por todos estos crímenes de guerra. Debe de llegarse a ese punto en donde Israel pague por todo esto que ha cometido en contra de Palestina y que también nosotros como comunidad, como sociedad, debemos defender la legislación internacional a favor de Palestina, a favor de los derechos humanos. Y que nos hagamos esta pregunta, si todo esto le sucede a Palestina, ¿por qué no sucedería en cualquier otro lado del mundo, no? Que es lo que todas decíamos cuando se recrudeció el genocidio a partir de 2023, ¿no? Decíamos, todo esto que le están haciendo a Palestina puede ocurrir en cualquier lugar del mundo si no detenemos a Israel y si no detenemos a Estados Unidos. Puede suceder en cualquier lugar del mundo. Ella nos dice lo que necesitamos es que haya justicia para Palestina, para que esto no se vuelva a repetir nunca jamás, que las convenciones sobre genocidio han sido puestas a prueba en Palestina y, y hemos visto, ¿no? Hemos visto las consecuencias de todos estos actos atroces por parte de Israel y Estados Unidos. Nos agradece a todas y a todos y nos pide que sigamos viendo a Palestina, que no volteemos nuestra vista hacia otro lado, que sigamos viendo a Palestina, que sigamos viendo que el usar la hambruna como un arma de guerra no debería de ser algo normalizado ni en Palestina ni en ningún lugar del mundo. Y, y que también sigamos usando nuestras voces para amplificar la voz de Palestina, para amplificar los derechos humanos de Palestina. Y finalmente, pues nos gustaría, si alguien quiere hacer alguna pregunta a la embajadora, ella va a leer en el chat las preguntas, entonces formulen sus preguntas y ella, en la medida de lo posible, irá haciendo las respuestas de sus preguntas. Entonces, utilicen el chat para hacer sus preguntas, por favor. So please use the chat to make your questions to the ambassador. She's going to choose, well, she will try to, because we don't have a lot of time, she will try to answer your questions. So please write your questions here on the chat and she's going to read your questions and she's going to try to answer most of your questions. Thank you. Alguien nos pregunta que cuánto va a durar esta conferencia. Pues el tiempo que tenemos es de 1 hora, de 1:30 a 2:30. Entonces tenemos estos minutos restantes para que nos formulen sus preguntas para la embajadora.
Okay, I see a first question here. And the question is, what can you say about the deliberations and composition of the Board of Peace? This is a this is an interesting one, I will say. I think for us as Palestine, we always look for any country who is willing to bring about a just solution to the conflict. and I shouldn't call it a conflict actually, because we don't like to call it a conflict because it's an occupation, it's a genocide, but who can bring peace to the Palestinians, who can give us our right to self-determination and give us the rights that we have been fighting for. For us, this issue is not complicated. It's an issue about freedom. It's an issue of human rights and international law and international justice. When we agreed to the the ceasefire that was proposed in the Security Council by the US that mentioned the board of peace, we as Palestinians agreed because we thought it would stop the killing. We were hoping that it would bring an end to the genocide. And now, yes, we have this quote unquote board of peace where there are no Palestinians on the board of peace. So that is obviously something that is concerning, but we have, of course, many friends who we use to try to bring the concerns of Palestine and our rights to the forefront of the table. This board of peace is part of efforts to bring about a just solution for Palestine. For us, what we depend on most are UN resolutions that have been adopted by the entire world. The majority of the world has every year for decades has voted in favor. We're talking about 174 countries usually vote in favor of the right of the Palestinian self-determination. So for us, we base our 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 plight and our just cause on UN resolutions, on international law, on international justice, on the advisory opinions of the of the International Court of Justice, and of course we hold in high regard the International Criminal Court, which, as you all know, has an arrest warrant for the Prime Minister of Israel. And what we also consider very important is something that was adopted before, right after the adoption of the resolution of the ceasefire in the Security Council, which I have to say, as someone who worked in the UN for more than 20 years and was the main negotiator of these resolutions in the Security Council and the General Assembly, it was a very different kind of looking resolution where many things were not put in that resolution, of course, on purpose. And we tried very hard to insert at least some of the things that we thought were most important, and many things we were not able to succeed in because we also don't have a seat at the Security Council. As you know, it's a 15-member group. Um, However, shortly after in the UN, there was a meeting that was convened by the Saudi Arabia and France, and they adopted something called the New York Declaration. And this is what we feel is the solution to how we can achieve this international consensus of a two-state solution. And it is based on international law, it is based on UN resolutions, and it literally details everything that must happen in order for us to get there. So the Board of Peace is something, and it's still right. It's still being formulated. There's still many questions about it. However, we still have many other initiatives that have been adopted by a larger group of the world that we need to insist on as Palestinians to make sure that it is consistent with what we have always based our just cause on, which is international law.
Nos dice la embajadora sobre esta propuesta que se generó de un Board of Peace, una mesa directiva para la paz en Palestina. Ella insiste en que lo que se debe hacer es respetar todas las resoluciones que se han generado desde la ONU referentes a Palestina. Si se respetaran todas esas resoluciones a favor de Palestina, ese es el ideal. Y menciona una declaración de de Nueva York, en donde se habla sobre esta solución de los dos estados con amplios derechos, tanto Palestina como Israel, que ese es lo que por lo que se está trabajando en Palestina.
Bueno, gracias. Ok, hay otra pregunta que dice, ¿el proceso del alto el fuego sigue en funcionamiento o fue cancelado? Okay, very good question too. For us, we continue to abide by the ceasefire because for us, we cannot give Israel any sort of quote unquote excuse or justification to continue what it wants to continue, which is the genocide, which it is trying to continue through other means, through not allowing aid in, through not allowing the more than 20,000 people who are waiting for evacuations to leave for urgent medical care, for not allowing us to for medicine, for hospitals to rebuild, for construction. This winter has been a horrible winter, and people were are living in tents, and their tents were over and over and over again flooded. And Israel has not allowed for the proper shelters to be sent into Gaza, which was agreed upon in these negotiations for a ceasefire that should have been done during the ceasefire phase one. And now we're in phase two. However, phase one still has been complied with by Israel. This is something that also I don't know why we're always shocked because this is something that we are constantly facing, the compliancy of Israel with whether whatever agreement that we have signed, whatever resolution that has been passed in the UN. So we continue to abide by the ceasefire, hoping that the parties who are also very interested in making sure the ceasefire sticks, like the countries in the region, and pressure the US to pressure Israel to end these sort of these violations that are occurring on a daily basis, and at the same time to also focus on the West Bank, what's happening, because now when everybody's looking at the at Gaza, it's almost as if Israel has been given the ability to do whatever they want in the West Bank as Gaza continues to suffer and the tension is there. Also, not only in Palestine, but in Lebanon, in Syria. Now we will have a situation in Iran that is Israel is very intent on also attacking. So it's not just we're being attacked. It's more than one country at the same time. So we can only hope that at one point Israel will feel some real pressure, some real accountability to end these violations and to really try to go down a different route, which I don't think is possible with this extremist government that Israel has, unfortunately.
Nos comenta la embajadora que el cese al fuego es muy importante, aunque Israel la mayor parte de las veces no lo respeta. O sea, se firma un cese al fuego y ellos no respetan lo que se firmó. Pone un ejemplo que este invierno fue muy, muy crudo y entonces las casas de campaña de la gente se vinieron abajo, no soportaron y entonces tendría que entrar ayuda humanitaria para que la gente tenga refugios en donde vivir y todo esto lo ha prohibido Israel. Entonces no puede llegar esa ayuda humanitaria y la situación sigue empeorando más y más en Gaza. Y toda esta situación tan extrema de, pues sí, de violaciones a derechos, de genocidio, también hacen que luego nos olvidemos un poco de Cisjordania, ¿no? Pero Cisjordania pues también está sufriendo mucho a consecuencia de los actos atroces por parte de Israel. Entonces también ahí en Cisjordania hay muchas violaciones a los derechos humanos, muchas situaciones de de pérdidas humanas, de pérdida de cada vez más y más derechos humanos que debería de tener la población tanto en Cisjordania como en toda Palestina.
There's a question that says, "Thank you so much for your time and your work. Thank you, and thank you for your support." This is from Branca. And the question is, I wonder what else do you think Mexico or broader Latin America can do to stop this genocide? I think it's really important to insist on accountability. And for its part, Mexico has has participated in the hearings of the International Court of Justice and the International Criminal Court, which is very important. And also Latin America, for the most part, has been very in solidarity with Palestine. Now we have a shift, right? We had many elections that have happened over the past couple of months, and there has been a shift rightward. But the people, I believe, and I believe this is so important. And somebody like me, I think this has resonated in a way that I never thought in my life I would feel. But traveling all over the world, you see the support for Palestine from people like yourselves, these people who have a conscience, who believe that this is wrong, who are speaking up, who are marching in the streets, who are choosing different products to buy, not ones that can benefit Israel, who are educating themselves on what is happening, because that is also a big part of understanding what your part is in this, is being is keeping yourself informed of what's happening and learning about Palestine, not only through our tragedy and our suffering, but learning about it as a people who are very proud of our culture and our history and our beautiful art and food, and the people who are always looking for joy. And that's a big way that we resist. And that's a big way that we remain, is because we have a connection to this land. And we as a people are people who love life and believe that one day things will change, because nothing lasts forever. So it's important to speak to your parliamentarians, to speak to your government, to continue to insist on them to speak up for what's right, for international justice, for accountability. It's important that business is not as usual with the state that commits genocide. You know, countries should not be friends with a state that commits genocide. There should be a revision of trade agreements. There should be a ban completely on settlement products. I don't know here in Mexico, to be quite honest with you, and this is something that I'm looking into, to know what kind of products come here from Israel. Because if we want to really talk about legal, we'll talk about Israel and the settlements. Israel's presence on our land that we have accepted, right? We have accepted to have our country on 22% of historical Palestine. However, Israel continues to encroach more and more and more, wanting literally all of it. But what products come from these settlements that are on our land, used with our resources? What products are Palestinian that are marked Israeli products? These things are important to know what you're buying. If you're buying something, it's important to know what you're eating. When you go to a restaurant, they say Middle Eastern, Mediterranean. Are these Israeli restaurants who are putting Palestinian products like za'atar as if it's theirs? I mean, this is cultural appropriation. So it's important to keep yourself informed and make sure that you're not supporting, not knowingly, of course, Israel and its attempt to completely erase not only us as a people but our culture and our identity. Um, I think it's also important to the BDS. I think the BDS is really a very powerful organization that uses the boycott of products and companies in a peaceful manner. I think they've had a lot of success in, for example, closing different businesses that were operating in the occupied Palestinian territory. So that's something that is easily able to get involved. Um, and I think really it's important. I mean, you're doing what you're doing right now. I know you all have very busy schedules and lives, but you came on to listen to me as a Palestinian voice. Listen to us. Listen to us Palestinians. Read what Palestinians say. Translate, if you can, in Spanish, Palestinian stories, because they have for decades tried to dehumanize us. And I think what has happened through this genocide, and it took something so horrible, but we were humanized through ourselves, through the Palestinians recording themselves, living in this nightmare, but you still saw their moments of joy. You still saw their moments of resilience and resistance to being completely exterminated. You saw them sharing, you saw them helping each other, and you saw that through all of this, they still maintain this level of human decency and dignity. Um, so listen to Palestinians, share information, talk to your friends, talk to your family, because again, many people think this is a complicated issue. It's not a complicated issue. We are people who are wanting to end this occupation. We have agreed to live next to the state of Israel on 78% of historic Palestine. We want our rights like everybody else. We want our children to grow up without the sounds of drones and without the fear of being arrested in the middle of the night, without the fear of their I'm sorry, their families being killed. So this is what we're asking for. And I think Palestine has been a mirror of what is so wrong with the world, but it's also been a mirror of what is so right with the world, with the solidarity and the people coming out. So there's, of course, so many things that can be done. And I also would like to recommend maybe, Anna Laura, you can write down our Instagram, my Instagram, and the embassy Instagram, because we are always answering questions and just like this, what else can we do? And we are always posting things about Palestinian culture and food and different things that are on a little bit lighter um, of topic because it's important for people to know who we are as a people.
Pues nos dice la embajadora que no se nos olvide este tema de que todos los hechos realizados por Israel deberían de tener una consecuencia legal, que nosotras en nuestras comunidades, en nuestros países, exijamos a nuestros gobiernos que apoyen a la Corte Internacional de Justicia en esta búsqueda de, de defender a Palestina, en esta búsqueda de terminar con este genocidio, con este apartheid y que nos sigamos informando sobre Palestina, también sobre su cultura, sobre su historia, sobre su arte, sobre su comida. Eso también es importante que compartamos y que aprendamos de toda esta parte tan enriquecedora que es la cultura de Palestina para seguir defendiendo a ese país. Eh, y que finalmente, pues ellos como palestinos y palestinas, pues ellos también, ellas aman la vida y quieren tener una vida digna, una vida con todos sus derechos plenos. Que sigamos presionando desde nuestros pueblos, nuestras ciudades, a nuestros gobiernos, que es en donde nuestro trabajo como colectivas es cada vez más importante y que también pidamos revisión de los tratados de libre comercio para que nuestros gobiernos rompan todos esos tratados con Israel. No puede ser que sigamos teniendo en México, ese es uno de nuestros problemas, ¿no? Que en México hay un tratado de libre comercio y no debería de existir porque Israel está violando todos los derechos de Palestina, ¿no? Que sigamos apoyando el BDS, que es un movimiento mundial que ha sido efectivo en muchas de las medidas que el BDS nos ha propuesto, que es muy buena herramienta para apoyar a Palestina, que sigamos hablando de esa dignidad humana de la gente de Palestina y que simplemente ellas y ellos quieren vivir con todos sus derechos plenos como nación.
Mhm. Okay, there's many questions about the UN, so maybe I'll answer all that sort of together. You know, the question of the UN is many people think it's the UN that has failed, but it's the member states of the UN. The UN is only there to basically carry out what the UN member states voted for. And yes, the General Assembly, which is basically like the parliament of the world, their resolutions are important because it's the voice of all of the countries, but they're not considered law, like international law. It's more of, but they're still important, right? They're still important. The Security Council is the one, as I believe Victoria had mentioned, is true, or somebody had mentioned that it is the organ of the UN that is responsible for international peace and security, but we see that it's failed. And why has it failed? Is because they have this veto power. You have 15 members on the table, five permanent members, and those five have veto power. And we've seen the veto being used. I mean, I think it was used like more than 80 times by the US and throughout the inception of the UN. And we've also seen other countries use it, right, for their own personal uh, agendas, whether it was in Syria, of Syria issues, or whether it was um, on other issues that those five members felt the need to use their veto. However, no one's used their veto more than the US to block any sort of real solution for bringing any sort of real peace to Palestine and also Israel. I mean, it's these are people too that deserve to also live in a place that they believe is that they believe is peaceful and safe. And the ones who are making them unsafe is their own government by feeding them this idea that if they don't conquer the whole Middle East and control it, that something's going to happen to them. And this idea of fear mongering, we know how it works. And unfortunately, most of the society in Israel had no problem with the genocide. The marches that they were doing in the street were basically to get their people back from Gaza, not about the more than 70,000 Palestinians who were being killed and starved, and not about the 10,000 Palestinian hostages that they took just from the past 2 years. And I'm not talking about all Israelis because there are many who have protested against this. And of course, when we talk about Israel, we separate the Jewish faith from that because we know that our allies in the Jewish communities have stood by us, and they have been even more uh, horrified by what is happening than many others who are closer to us in the world, right, and in the region. So we thank them and we consider them uh, really such a strong ally, and hope that their voices their voices are probably heard more than ours sometimes because of who they are, and we thank them for being so brave and standing by us. Now, Resolution 377, Uniting for Peace, we use it all the time because whenever there's a veto, we go right to the UN General Assembly for this. And while this has like a higher authority, the resolutions, I mean, they're still not able to stop what is going on. These sort of resolutions that we've used were the resolutions that we used in order to bring the questions to the International Court of Justice, such as, is the occupation illegal? We brought the issue when the US vetoed the resolution in the Security Council when Israel started building their annexation wall. We brought the issue to the General Assembly for Uniting for Peace, and we also then got another advisory opinion from there about the wall being illegal. Look, I mean, the issue is the law is applied very selectively, and some are completely immune. It was the UN that created the State of Israel. It was a General Assembly resolution. So why is that being applied? And all the hundreds of resolutions that we have on Palestine not? I mean, every year in the General Assembly, we have a package of resolutions. And they range from the right of Palestinian self-determination to the issue of UNRWA, which is a UN agency that Israel's completely destroyed all of its buildings, just, created this huge propaganda about it being supporting terrorists. This is a humanitarian agency, and this is the important part of the UN. One of the biggest, most important things of the UN is what they do on a humanitarian basis. And for us as Palestinians who would like to not have any sort of aid, we are people who can definitely build our own country. We have worked in the region to build other countries with our expertise. We are the most educated population in the Middle East, even with this occupation, even with the restrictions, because we've had the UN presence there who has been not only a source of us for education and opportunities, but um, but hope, right? And so for Israel, the UN is problematic, even though they continue to be a member of the UN, because they report on what's happening on the ground, because they are witnesses to the genocide, because it is all based on, international law and human rights law. So of course they think everything is biased. And it's the same reason why they are also banning all of these NGOs from being on the ground in Palestine, precisely when we need them to be there. Because one, they don't want to see any Palestinians being helped, and two, they don't want witnesses. They've killed all of our journalists, and they don't allow any journalists internationally to enter. So it's very clear, like someone said in the they want to continue what they're doing. Their whole plan has always been, not only now, but always has been more Palestinian territory with less Palestinians. So we will continue to go and adopt resolutions. We will continue to try to push for every sort of legal tool that we have at our hands. We will continue to press the ICC to actually make these arrests. We will continue to make sure that member states fully abide by these international court of justice advisory opinions. Because again, if they do not do this for Palestine, then they are completely risking the entire thing from falling. And the UN is the only thing we have right now. There's no alternative. So do we let it just crash and not have anything, or do we try with what we can to try to put it to get put it back together a little bit with the countries who really know that the only thing that really protects them is international law, not their armies, not their connections, not their the influence they have. But for countries like Palestine, for countries like Mexico, for countries like most countries in the world, this is what the protection is the law, is international law. So without it, then, it's not something that is positive for anyone. So I see there's also many more questions. Maybe we can take a screenshot of these questions and I can try to answer them somehow. And I also do this thing every Friday where I answer questions um, of people who are asking questions about Palestine on different issues. So that can also be a place where I can try to answer some of these. But maybe Lulu can answer, then I will just say goodbye.
Ok, sí, nos dice la embajadora que de esta última pregunta, ¿no? Que desde la perspectiva suya no es que la ONU haya fallado, lo que han fallado son los estados miembros de la ONU. El Consejo de Seguridad ha fallado por el poder del veto que siempre Estados Unidos aplica en contra de los derechos de Palestina. Nos dice que Israel quiere conquistar todo el Medio Oriente para sentirse un país seguro, ¿no? Que ese es el objetivo que tienen en Israel. Nos comenta que han sido 10.000 personas de Palestina las personas que han sido arrestadas en el pasado, en este pasado reciente, que también eso es muy grave. Y de la resolución 377 la usa Palestina todo el tiempo en Naciones Unidas, siempre la usa para que se respete los derechos de Palestina, pero que también sabemos que la ley se aplica selectivamente y que cada año la delegación de Palestina cada año envía paquetes de distintas resoluciones para salir de esta gravedad de todo este genocidio. Nos comenta que Israel pues también destruyó a UNRWA, que era este organismo que veía por los derechos de las y los palestinos en su territorio, y que Israel ha estado destruyendo todas las ONGs que hacían trabajo humanitario en Palestina, las ha estado destruyendo en su totalidad, porque pues no quiere que haya ningún testigo del genocidio. Pero ¿qué es lo que le queda a Palestina? ¿Qué es lo que nos queda a nosotras, las naciones del sur global? Pues nos queda seguir trabajando desde la ONU porque es la única alternativa que tenemos estas naciones para defender nuestros derechos y para protegernos, ¿no? De esta embestida tan fuerte por parte de Israel y de los Estados Unidos y países aliados. Entonces nos comenta la embajadora que va a tomar nota de todas las preguntas que ustedes han formulado para tratar de en un futuro irles mandando respuestas.
Ojalá.
Y que ojalá, y que también, por favor, tomen nota, aquí está su Instagram, tanto de la embajada como el Instagram de la embajadora, para que también ahí puedan tener comunicación con ella, con la embajada, con todo el material que nos proporcionan cada semana. Hay una parte de preguntas sobre Palestina los viernes, me parece. Entonces está muy bien todo el contenido porque habla de muchas otras cosas menos dolorosas, menos difíciles, como son todos estos temas de la riqueza cultural y artística de Palestina. También nos dice que mucho del trabajo que la ONU ha hecho en Palestina ha sido un fuerte apoyo para la educación de la gente, que la gente palestina es la que tiene el nivel educativo más alto en todo Medio Oriente. A pesar de tantas adversidades, de tantas dificultades, la gente siempre le ha interesado en Palestina tener una muy buena educación, porque saben la importancia de la educación. Y todo ese trabajo lo ha estado destruyendo también Israel, ¿no? Porque quieren borrar, borrar de nuestras mentes la existencia de la cultura de Palestina, la existencia de Palestina, ¿no? Como un país.
Yes. Thank you, Lulu, and thank you to all of you for listening and being here. I hope we can stay in touch and I hope I can see you all in person. I love San Miguel de Allende. I have a very good friend there, Kate. She's on the line as well. But hopefully soon in the future we can all meet and sit and have a coffee or tea and discuss as friends. And I thank you for all of your support and for all the solidarity. It really is something that keeps us going. So thank you.
Pues nos da las gracias la embajadora a todas y todos los que estuvimos hoy aquí, a quienes participamos en esta conferencia tan enriquecedora y que ojalá podamos conocernos todas y todos en un futuro próximo y sigamos haciendo mucha labor por Palestina.
Ay, muchas gracias a todos. Nos vemos pronto.
Gracias, embajadora. Gracias a todas y a todos y ya hasta pronto. Tengan un excelente día y que viva Palestina libre.
Viva. Muchas gracias. Nos vemos.